Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make beef stew my way. What you're going to need is 2 pounds of beef stew meat, and we're going to remove the fat from the cubes of beef. Now, fat does generate flavor, so you can leave the fat on one beef cube, but you want to make sure that you remove the fat from all of the other cubes of beef. The vegetables that we're going to be using are celery, carrots, an onion, and potatoes. I personally only use 1 rib stalk of celery, 1 carrot, half an onion, and 3 potatoes. But if you like a lot of vegetables in your beef stew, you can use all of that. The seasonings that we're going to be putting in our beef stew are salt, garlic powder, our herb is thyme leaves. We're going to be using some black pepper. You're going to use 1 bay leaf, and you know that we do everything different on a Philly Boy J cooking show. You know that my recipes are always unique. So yes, we're going to be using brown sugar, even though you might not see brown sugar in a lot of beef stew recipes. Another ingredient that you might not find in beef stew recipes is ketchup. We're going to be using that too. We're going to be using flour. That's going to be our thickening agent. We're going to be using 4 cups of water, 1 cup of broth, and W sauce. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. What we're going to do first is we're going to place a big pot, a stew size pot, over high heat, and we're going to add 2 to 3 tablespoons of oil, and we're going to be browning our beef cubes. That's what gives the stew lots of flavor. When you brown it, you bring out the flavor, and it also gives the stew color. It darkens your broth. Now, back in the day, to create a broth for stew, they would only use water. And you see the seasoning and the residue left at the bottom of the pot there? They would use that to darken their broth and to create that broth. We're going to deglaze that seasoning and residue at the bottom of the pot, but you want your beef cubes to be nice and dark brown like that right there. You don't want to burn them, but you want them to be nice and brown like that there. What we're going to do now is we're going to add the 1 cup of beef broth to the 4 cups of water. Now, if you just want to use broth, I recommend that you use vegetable or chicken broth. Beef broth is extremely strong. If that's all you're using, your beef stew is probably going to have a very strong taste, and it's not going to taste good. That's why I cut my beef broth by using 4 cups of water and just 1 cup of beef broth. We're going to add 4 big tablespoons of flour to the broth water mixture, and we're going to create a slurry. We're going to give it a nice stir until it's nice and smooth and all of the flour is dissolved. And that's the way your slurry should look. Like milky coffee. Now make sure the fire under the pot is off when adding the ingredients. We're going to be adding a half a cup of ketchup. Now I personally use a whole cup of ketchup in my beef stew, but for those of you who are just trying this recipe, start off with a half a cup of ketchup. We're going to be adding 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. If you don't have brown sugar, you can use white sugar, but the brown sugar adds a slightly different flavor to the beef stew, more like a molasses flavor to me. We're going to add 2 tablespoons of W sauce. It's going to give the beef stew a really nice flavor. We're going to be using 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. I don't use minced garlic or whole garlic cloves. I use garlic powder. And salt to taste. I can't tell you guys how much salt to use. You can add the salt at the very end. Add however much you feel you need. And we're going to be adding 1 teaspoon of black pepper and a half a teaspoon of thyme. Now with the salt, if you want to follow my recipe to a T, I use 2 teaspoons of salt. You want to then add your 1 bay leaf. And then we're going to deglaze the seasoning and the residue at the bottom of the pot with our water broth slurry. See all that seasoning coming up from the bottom? And you're going to stir it and scrape the bottom with your plastic spoon to bring all that seasoning up into the liquid. And see how it darkened our broth? That's why you don't need beef broth. You can just simply use water, because the seasoning and the residue at the bottom that was created from the beef cubes darken your water and creates its own broth. Okay? So we're going to allow this to simmer on low heat for 1 hour, and we're going to cover it with a lid so that our beef cubes get nice and tender. So make sure it's covered with a lid. Now, an hour later, after an hour has gone by, you're going to dice your celery into really small pieces. I end up using a carrot and a half and a half of onion. I don't like a lot of onions in my beef stew, so I'm going to use half an onion. Okay. I also only use 3 potatoes. But like I said, if y'all like a lot of vegetables in your beef stew, you can use all 4 potatoes, 2 stalks of celery, 2 carrots, and a whole onion. It's up to you. Some people like a lot of vegetables in their stew. I don't. So you're going to peel your potatoes and you're going to dice them up into shapes that size, like medium size shapes. Not really big, not really small. Now look at how tender the meat is after an hour. But we're going to continue cooking it for another 45 minutes to an hour so that it can get even more tender. And see how dark our stew is now? From all of that residue and seasoning that was at the bottom of the pot, it darkened our liquid in our broth. You're going to add your potatoes after the first hour and all of your vegetables after the first hour. And you're going to give it a nice stir. And then you're going to cover it with the lid again so that the carrots and the potatoes get nice and tender. And you're going to cut the fire off once the potatoes are tender, or once the broth dissolves and becomes a nice thick gravy. Okay? I usually let mine cook until the broth thickens. And 1 hour later, this is the way our beef stew is looking. Look at that beef stew. Guys, let me tell you something. Please try this beef stew recipe out. Now me, I don't like my gravy extremely thick, because once you cut the fire off, it's going to thicken up a little bit anyway. So I suggest you cut your fire off before the gravy gets really thick. We're going to add a half a cup of frozen peas. And the reason why I add that last is because if you add it earlier, the peas are going to get really soggy and they're going to just disappear. You're not going to even see them. They're going to disintegrate. Okay? So that's our beef stew. I know that this recipe is different. It's not like other beef stew recipes that you saw before. It may not be even similar to the beef stew that your mama cooked when you were little or your grandmama cooked when you were little, but it's absolutely delicious. You're also going to remove the bay leaf at the end of the cooking process. But this is some real good beef stew. Try this recipe out. You guys are going to absolutely love it. And you're never going to go back to making beef stew the way you used to. Because I make the best. I said the best. This is truly the best beef stew recipe in the whole wide world. Nobody make beef stew like Philly Boy J. Nobody. Don't nobody make it quite like him. I said, I'll pay you to find somebody that make beef stew like Philly Boy J. I said, I'll pay you. I'll pay you. I'll pay you. I'll pay you. Look at that beef stew. Guys, give it a shot. I know sometimes it's a little frightening and scary to think outside the box and do things different from the way that you're used to doing them, but give this beef stew recipe a try. I know that you are going to love it. Give it a shot. It's absolutely delicious. You guys have been requesting this beef stew recipe all fall long, and I understand, because you want a nice, hearty, warm dish for the colder months. And I finally made it for you guys. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Peace.